communication for Unit 4. One of the things that this week's readings presses is that effective communication and clearly expressed expectations are essential to building strong school-family partnerships. Research has shown absolutely that communication skills must be explicitly defined, studied, and practiced. We don't know necessarily how to communicate effectively. We need to learn how to do so. For example, we know listening is essential to effective communication, and yet we often assume it's a naturally occurring function like breathing. This is reflected sometimes when we tell a student, just listen to me, assuming that our student just instinctively knows how to do so, that we don't have to teach her or him how to listen. Instead, though, listening actually does need to be explicitly taught, like all other communication skills, and we know that it can be honed through instruction and practice. Friend and Cook, in connecting this now to our educational system, thinking that communication skills need to be explicitly taught and practiced, we then go into how right now in most places our educational field sees communication and collaboration. So Friend and Cook explained that the norm in education in the US still is for teachers to work in isolation, holding primary authority and power over students and by extension their families. This unit's readings assert that that model is no longer viable. It's not enough for teachers to be effective only with their students. Excellence in teaching in the 21st century now requires that educators have the knowledge and skills to work effectively, empathetically, and collaboratively with both children and adults. So it's no longer good enough to say she has difficulty communicating well with her colleagues or with parents, but she's so good with children in the classroom. Instead, more and more teachers are required to be able to effectively communicate and collaborate with both adults and children. And research shows that this actually creates a better learning environment in the classroom for our students. So collaboration is necessary. And before we talk about what it requires, I want to read how Friend and Cook define it. They say interpersonal collaboration is a style for direct interaction between at least two co-equal parties voluntarily engaged in shared decision-making as they work towards a common goal. So this requires that we go beyond welcoming families and move towards building partnerships with families. It requires that we work towards equity in power and also in how decisions are made, and that we actually have common goals that we create together. Indeed, it really requires that we engage in the often difficult process of acknowledging and then redistributing power. So moving forward, one of the other things that our readings point out is that we're always communicating with others, intentionally or unintentionally. Too often, we concentrate on our content communication, our explicit information, what we explicitly are sharing with somebody, and we neglect the impact of relational dimensions, how people who are involved actually feel about each other. Imagine if you were getting some difficult feedback from a colleague. You get difficult feedback from a colleague whom you don't care for, who hasn't been particularly kind or supportive of you. How do you feel when you get that feedback, even if you know the feedback is essential for you to hear? Compare that to getting feedback from somebody you genuinely like, who you think supports you, who communicates clearly and well and respectfully. For me anyway, I hear feedback, necessary feedback, better from someone who communicates well and with whom I have positive relational dimensions with. Because of this, because we understand that relational dimensions are so important, it's essential for us to be mindful of our personal views and be aware of our biases. Because, as Pink points out, our emotions are often expressed through nonverbal cues. And this is why he pushes us to be hyper aware of how we express our feelings and biases. Because in fact, they're always coming through, and we want to make sure we're aware of how they come through. And we can reflect on how these personal feelings and biases influence our regard and interaction with others through self-awareness. And this connects to last week's readings. Both Friend and Cook and Pink point to a number of practices that are necessary for effective communication, including the motivation to communicate effectively. We want to actually do it. We need to actually do it. Building and practicing empathy, a tolerance for ambiguity, open-mindedness, a non-judgmental regard for others, mindfulness, an awareness of your behavior and others' behavior, and then how it affects you, and self-monitoring. For example, what might tip us towards defensiveness in a conversation with a family? All of those practices, however, require at least two beliefs. The first is that human beings are capable of growth and change. Most educators, I hope, subscribe to this belief. And the second is that most, if not all, seemingly innate characteristics like intelligence or talents, for example, can actually be learned and developed. This requires a growth mindset. So a growth mindset was created by or posited by Professor Dweck, a Stanford University psychologist, who proposed that most people have either a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. And her work is significantly impacting educational theory and practice. Someone with a fixed mindset sees one's intelligence, talents, and aptitudes as preset and unchanging. For example, how many times have I heard, and I've said myself, I just can't do math. I've always been bad at it and I always will be, or there's no way I can learn another language. My head just doesn't work that way. Professor Dweck claims that if one has a growth mindset, though, one rejects that intelligence is fixed and recognizes that it is modifiable, learnable, and teachable. And in fact, increasingly, brain science is showing that her theory is correct. She writes that students understand that their talents and abilities can be developed through effort, good teaching, and persistence. They don't necessarily think everyone's the same or anyone can be Einstein, but they believe everyone can get smarter if they work at it. Students who are mastery-oriented then think about learning, not about proving how smart they are. When they experience a setback, they focus on effort and strategies instead of worrying that they are incompetent. So those with a growth mindset, and I encourage all of us to move towards a growth mindset, understand that in order to expand their cognitive, emotional, and spiritual aptitudes, we must practice and practice. And to note that most of us actually have both a fixed and a growth mindset, depending on the issue before us. So as you read the text this week, I want to encourage you to think of the following statements and questions. As the semester progresses, we will be talking more explicitly about power, who has it, who doesn't, how it is either sustained or challenged, and why. Creating meaningful partnerships with families and community members requires that educators reflect on their own vulnerabilities, insecurities, and reevaluate their willingness to share expertise and power with others. With that in mind, think of Friend and Cook's statement that individuals may have parity as they work together on a specific collaborative activity, even though they may not have parity in other situations. How might you interpret this statement? How might this idea influence your understanding of building partnerships with families? And can you offer examples of when it might be appropriate to collaborate with families and when it might not be, and why? And again, I look forward to you addressing some of these issues on our discussion board. Friend and Cook are very specific in their definition of collaboration as well. What do you think of their definition? If trust is required for collaboration, as the authors suggest, how might teachers build trust with families? How do last week's readings connect to this goal? And finally, what are some of the barriers that personally interfere with you making clear meaning of your communication? There'll be additional questions for our discussion board as well posted. So I look forward to another engaging and interesting conversation, and I look forward to learning more from you. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.